Hello, welcome to the Music Production Podcast. This is your host, Brian Funk. I want to tell you about my new book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, 365 music-making activities for better songwriting and music production. I've come up with a music-making activity for you every single day of the year to jumpstart your creativity and help you find inspiration when you might not be feeling it. I think it's a great addition to any kind of New Year's resolution around music making. So maybe you want to check it out. Go to brianfunk.com/book, or you can find it on amazon.com. And if you've already picked up the book, thanks so much, and I hope you're enjoying it. Now on to the show. Hello, welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk, and on today's show, I have Brendan Becker, who is also known as Inverse Phase. He makes really awesome I'm going to say chiptune maybe, because I don't think 8-bit is completely accurate. But he also runs the Bloop Museum in Maryland, which is a giant tribute to retro gaming. I first came across your work, Brendan, at the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo. I play the records and just do some music there. And I found Pretty 8 Machine. I'm like, whoa, what is this? I recognize the 9 Inch Nails imagery, but it was like all 8-bit. And it was so awesome. You know, just first of all, it's such a great record that you chose to remake
thank you.
in a like video game style, retro video game style. But what really blew me away is when I opened it up, and for each track, you talk about the specific systems you used, the specific sound palettes you had at your disposal, and the challenges you faced. I just thought it was such a great, not only representation of the music, but also just so much insight into what went into making music back in those days on those old machines. So good. And you've got so much cool stuff on your Bandcamp. I'm a big fan of the old retro games and especially the music. So I'm really pumped to talk to you, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really good to have you.
So choose your own adventure. Where are we going first? What is your question about you mentioned the Pretty 8 Machine, but we can go in that direction. Or
maybe we can get to that. If you want to just tell us a little bit about what you're doing, because you're not just making music either. You're doing a lot of really cool stuff. And as you were saying before we started, recording this, they all kind of orbit together around your love of retro gaming and all that. So maybe you can take us through what it is with the museum and the music making.
Yeah, sure. I've always just been, I'm probably on the spectrum. Just get that out of the way. And I've always been obsessed with things with, like flashing lights or interesting sounds or whatever. And a lot of my memories are around some sort of like cool, flashy technology or something like that. So like, just to give you a couple examples, one, I'm definitely always the kid that, go to the mall with my parents and my mom can find me in the Sears electronics department 7 hours later. Like that's me. Whenever they had like a demo up at, Sears Radio Shack, whatever, of like the new latest, greatest thing, I could be seen, patiently waiting to try it and observing while other people try it and like just kind of trying to take all of that in. Or, like in magazines, I'd always be looking at the, sort of up and coming technology or games or whatever and be like, oh, I can't wait to see that. And trying to see if I can see it when I, go to the stores or whatever, and wondering what happened to all the stuff that, didn't actually come out. But maybe a more personal and an experience that I can own is a failed technology called Select-O-Vision or CEDs, which is movies on vinyl records. Is something that my granddad owned. And so like I have very specific memories of like sitting in his basement like watching movies on Select-O-Vision, and the same with my like friends down the street from me when like we lived in like one of my grade school homes and whatever. Like that's someone that lived like a block down the street. his dad had one of these systems, and these are like the only two people that ever owned one that I know of. And like, you're looking at me like, I don't know anyone that ever owned a Selectavision.
Never
I don't even
heard
know
of
what
it.
that was. Yeah,
Movies on vinyl record. That's crazy.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of indirectly or pseudo directly related to the Golden record that went up with the Voyager probe. So, there's the recording of like, hello in 50 languages and some music and sounds from Earth and whatever. But there's a second record with images from Earth. And, like there's instructions engraved onto the record about how to print or how to play the record and how to get a signal out of the record and whatever. So the Golden record is directly related to this format, which is motion video rather than spinning a record at, you actually spin them at half of 33 1/3. So you spin them at 16 RPMs. And it synthesizes a still image, but this actually spins at 450 RPMs, and the needle bounces up and down instead of back and forth. And there's, all sorts of cool stuff going on with it, but it is literally a vinyl record, and there is literally, a stylus that touches the record. And there's a video format on it. So I think that that's actually maybe a perfect example of something that appears in my museum. And I love telling people about stuff that they've never heard before and whatever. So I ended up a museum docent, but also a curator, because I have to learn about all of this stuff before I talk about it. I'm not, and no hate on docents that do this sort of a thing. Some docents just kind of learn everything that they need to say to give the same tour every time so that they can deliver, a perfect performance or whatever. But my museum tours are me talking about the stuff that I have collected and learned about, and now I want to convey this knowledge to you. And that's really, my idea of those things. So I've always wanted to get people together in a way that they can learn and share knowledge and, experience the same things that beeped and booped for me as a kid, and now I can do it with them. And so actually you could say bleep and bloop, and now you get why I named my museum that. Another good example is I learned to read at the age of 2. And the reason I learned to read is, arguably I was a little bit ahead developmentally or something like that. But my dad started bringing home a computer from work, and he would do all sorts of, he was an editor at a magazine and whatever. So I wanted to know what he was doing on that computer. And the easiest way to be a curious kid is to look over his shoulder. Oh, well, it's a bunch of words. What do they mean? You start learning that. And suddenly he brings home not Reader Rabbit, which didn't exist yet, but Easy Reader. Or maybe Reader Rabbit did exist, but I think Easy Reader came first, and it was a different, package and whatever. But that was compatible with the machine that he brought home, and he sat me down at it and showed me how to, start up the game and, whatever. And bam, suddenly I entered kindergarten with a 5th grade reading level because I was just eating that stuff up.
Right.
So another example of something that beeps and bloops, has flashing lights, and, I want to have everything to do with those sorts of things. And so my museum is about that, it's about things that entertain people. It's about consumer products. I actually am partnered with a computer museum that does a whole bunch of business, commercial, industrial sort of stuff. So we because we're partnered and because we're not really opposites per se. We're both, we have computers and games and stuff like that, but they're a much more serious entity, and I'm a much less serious entity.
More fun and games.
And I think it's a good pairing. I think it works really nice. And so we've got about 20,000 square feet of space, and that is about to grow by maybe about 10 as someone moves out of our building and another museum moves into the back of the building. So then we'll be 3 museums instead of 2. And we're going to grow our museums respectively just a little bit. So, like there's going to be a lot of cool stuff going on here. And it's all inside of this like IT company. It's very unsuspecting, just north of Baltimore. So you don't really expect that you're going to a museum. You show up at this like office building that's kind of hiding behind the McCormick Spice Mill, and it smells like curry and cinnamon and pumpkin spice every other day, and whatever. And you go in and you're just in this like lobby, but then you go back and you see all the stuff and whatever. So we often encourage tours just because you're not going to fall in love with the collection if you don't get the stories to go with it, I think.
Yeah, well, I can hear that in your just talking about it. Like, there are some, I'm sure, tours you go on where the people learn what they need to say for the job, but you're really drawing from your experience and your love of all of this. So it's got to be, an extra special way to
it's
see
the
everything.
wizard that wants to convey to the apprentice, what is how to truly understand, all of these things, rather than, like, okay, I'm going to teach you this. If you walk away and you remember 2 things, then great. Here's the pop quiz, okay, see ya. I don't really want to take that attitude. I really want to help people fall in love with this stuff the same way I did.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things I love at the expo on Long Island, and it's I mean, you even see it with music and musical instruments too. It's just so much of what I see is parents bringing a child around, like, this was my Xbox, this is my Fortnite, telling them like, this is the thing that we had. And even as a kid, I remember seeing like some of my parents' toys. My dad had like the football game where it was just a bunch of players on this metal field that would vibrate. And they would just kind of just wiggle around the field. No strategy, just pure chance. Yeah. But it was exciting and fun at the time. And to see it, in real life is pretty cool. I wonder if we're losing that a little bit, as everything is so in the cloud and just on a computer. But it's really fun to see that get passed on, and the excitement and the curiosity of like the younger generations.
Yeah, we definitely get a lot of smiles when people come in. I encourage people. One thing that we try to focus on is interactivity. A lot of museums have things behind glass, or whatever, but I've just got, like an Apple II sitting on a table with a disc inside. I want you to hold the disc. I want you to put the disc in there. I want you to, like close the disc drive and turn on the Apple II and like turn it on and hear that, beep, clack, 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 like I want them to have that experience, because that's the kind of thing that, again, I think it really helps people connect with the technology and realize what it was like, and, that sort of a thing. And, we just had some kids in earlier with their parents and whatever. And like one of the kids is like super into retro and 16 years old. Right. And so like, he actually gets it. And maybe his little brother didn't quite as much or whatever, but I think it just makes it that much more real when you get to interact with this thing and be like, oh, so this is what it's like. And so to further drive that point home, we have a PDP-8 here, which is old digital computer from the 60s. And, I had them turn that on and be like, okay, so how do you start a game? And they just look at me like, and it's like, all right, so here's what you do first, and here's what you do next, and, like that sort of a thing. And I think, again, putting it in their hands, like being like, well, we can play a game as long as you can figure it out, which actually in a way, very directly relates to the whole, my dad showing me how to start my games on the computer that he brought home, whenever. It's just that sort of, like you get to do it computer experience that makes history real. And I love watching people figure it out or learn about it or whatever. And not everyone has a good time, but like some people are like, oh man, that's boring. Why don't they just make it so that you touch the screen? Or, you get people like that. But But the majority of people, I think they can, even people like that can appreciate that we've made things a lot easier since, and I do think that something is getting lost in, you mentioned, is something lost with everything in the cloud and, that sort of a thing. I do think that we've kind of lost the plot a little bit, but I think that the reason that we've lost the plot doesn't really have to do with the advancement of technology as much as that we haven't advanced our own education. Mm-hmm. We've made computers easier, but we haven't made humans smarter. And I won't go on a huge tirade about it, but I just think that, and this relates to like the famous old people statement where it's like, you don't even know what that thing is doing, or you don't know where it's been, or you don't know how it works or whatever. I think people, even if they only spent, like an hour playing with an old computer before they spent an hour playing with a new computer, they would have a better understanding of how the machine works and whatever. If you can teach someone who wants to work in like IT or computer support or whatever, how to read all of the error messages on the screen and what each one of those means and how to solve each one of those problems. But like, if you just taught them like the underlying logic of programming, like some extremely basic programming, perhaps even in the basic programming language, but definitely like just simple logic, I think that they could figure the rest out on their own, and we're not really doing that as humans, we're not, I don't think there's any core required computer education that has been standardized in the schools, still. And, computers have been out for as long as both of us have been alive. Like, where is it? Yeah,
it's like an elective maybe. And, it used to be there was the computer lab. And I kind of remember, I don't know if they were Apple IIs or what they were, but they had them when I was a kid. And it was like exciting that you went there, but that was it. And now I think it's almost like there's just sort of this understanding like, well, you already have a computer. You already know what it does. So you're just going to use it to do whatever work you're going to do. You're going to type your papers or something. But none of the real, like you said, like the deep understanding of how it works so that you can take it somewhere new instead of just kind of do what's already been done with it.
Yeah. So I hope to fill in that gap, at the museum. Like, I'm willing to sit down with people. I have a slightly famed reputation with the people here in the office that I will give like 6-hour museum tours if people just sit there and ask me questions and whatever. And I just don't care. Like, I want, if you're interested in this stuff, I want people to ask me as many questions as they can until they're happy with all of the answers that they've gotten and they've learned something and they've sucked something in. And the chances are that the more they ask and the more time they spend here, the more interested they'll get in it. So I want to suck people into that and have them understanding the technology they're using and, where it came from.
That's great because especially if you're someone that's free into that, you're a kid maybe, and you don't know where to get that information, and then you find somebody, and it could be for anything that you want to learn. But when you find that person that's excited to watch you get excited about it, I mean, that's just the best. That's really cool.
That's a huge reward for me.
Yeah.
Is just seeing anyone that comes through the door and actually wants to learn or has learned or has had a good time. So, yeah. So anyway, that's the museum side of things. And I've learned a whole lot about these computers, both before I actually ran a museum or started a museum. I wanted to start a museum for like 10 years at least, and didn't really succeed at it until maybe about 5 years ago. But then, amidst learning about all of these things and living all of these things, one thing that's followed me around my entire life is music. So one of the things that I learned, speaking of Pretty Ape Machine, is, before this, I kind of wrote some Nintendo music and some Commodore 64 music. And I decided for Pretty Ape Machine that I was really going to blow the doors wide open and learn to write music on like a dozen different computers and really figure out how they work, figure out how the sound hardware works, that sort of a thing. And so part of what you're seeing when you look at those like track descriptions, where I'm talking about not just, the creative challenges, but the technical challenges, is because in part, I was just kind of getting excited about having learned all of that and knowing more about that than I ever had before, right? And while working on that album, I certainly learned a lot. And I learned, I already knew a decent number of music writing tricks on a lot of old systems and whatever, but really, spent a year and a half on that album. The amount of things, and it's like, if I had more than two eyes to open, they are wide open, and even if it's like, many eyes have been opened, and, like I'm constantly sharing that knowledge while I'm learning it and whatever, and really getting into chiptune stuff just deeper and deeper as I do all of that. So anyway, that plays also into this museum and like retro obsession thing and whatever. So now I can just tell people, the computers in the museum are what I wrote Pretty 8 Machine on, and that's not actually wrong. It is fully true that, like a bunch of the hardware that I wrote it on is just right here, and people can just see it. And so, people will come to me for game soundtracks, or I'll just do tributes on my own, or, I'll decide to screw around with people and, like I did Shake Bit. I don't know if you ended up at that on the Bandcamp or not. And if you didn't end up at Shake Bit, you don't need to end up at Shake Bit. It's just 11 Harlem Shakes on different hardware platforms.
That's awesome.
So that, and I did this so that like clients asking me for, chiptunes and whatever, and I'd be like, is there a platform or aesthetic that you were thinking of? And it's so that, like any of the clients that are like, can you make it 8-bit? I'm like, well, let's talk about
is that. What you mean?
Yeah. Because here are 11 different systems that are 8-bit, and notice how different they sound and whatever. So now, it is maybe unfortunate that I chose Harlem Shake and not something a little bit less annoying. I don't know. But now they can listen to the exact same, like 27 or whatever it is, second loop on all of these systems and, hear what that sounds like. So,
that's cool.
So that's the fun obsession with that. So when you were introducing me and you said 8-bit, well, no, let's call it chiptune.
Yeah.
That was a very good move on your part.
Well, even Pretty 8 Machine covered quite a range. So, that was something that struck me too when I was looking at it. It wasn't just the very old games, it was everything. So,
well, and all of those systems, okay, I'm lying. The Sega Genesis is a 16-bit system, and I did do one Sega Genesis thing on there, but the rest of those systems are 8-bit. So everyone would be like, well, that's 8-bit music, but they don't pay attention to the fact that the sound chips, even though they're living on an 8-bit bus in an 8-bit machine, are actually producing, each channel produces 4-bit sound, not 8-bit sound. And so there's this like, you can just go down this rabbit hole of, like, well, what is correct? And that's why I think chiptune is really the best word to use still, or some people will, be a little bit artisanal and call them chip music or micro music or, something like that. And that's fine too, whatever. But like chiptune is literally just a sound chip making a tune. And I think that is probably the most accurate way to describe it. And I say chiptune stops at synthesis. So as soon as you get into samples, you're not really writing chiptunes anymore. There's maybe an exception with the Amiga, and that is that the like conventional or low memory that the sound chip and the CPU both have access to is called chip memory. And so sometimes if a tune fits in chip memory, they'll call it a chiptune. So that's like a weird Amiga edge case, right? And most of the tunes that they do that sound this way are, like very short looping samples, just like the wave channel on the Game Boy, if you've ever written Game Boy music, or, if whoever's listening has ever written Game Boy music. So you have, like they would write tunes like this, and they'd be 4 channels in size, and you'd have the equivalent of 4 wave channels, and the waves are really tiny and looping and whatever. So they still sound like, like chippy, old 8-bit game music, whatever. But those channels on the Amiga are 6-bit. So there's that. If you combine them all together and you really work the chip hard, you can get 53 kilohertz 14-bit audio out of Amiga, one channel. So that's something to to think about or whatever.
Yeah.
But this is like with like all of the knowledge that we've built to date, not the sound chip as it was engineered. And that sort of things. Anyway, my point is that if you get into samples, I say that's where you draw the line with chiptunes. So the Super Nintendo is not chiptune.
Yeah.
Because that's a big sample playback engine that just plays stuff in DSPs. But some people are like, oh, but does that mean that 16-bit music isn't chiptune? If you look at the Atari ST, the direct competitor to the Amiga, really, they put, I'm going to anger some people, and I apologize in advance. They put the shittiest sound chip that they could put in the Atari ST. It's a YM2149, which is a clone of the AY38910. And the 8910 is a 3-channel sound chip engineered in 1978. And they put it in this computer that came out literally 8 years later. Like, come on, guys, like they could have done so much better with that. But the person in charge was Jack Trammell, and, he was kind of a shrewd businessman, asshole type that, just wanted to, cheap it out. And they gave the machine MIDI, which, a lot of musicians are like, oh yeah, I got my start with, Cubase or whatever on the Atari ST and as MIDI and whatever. And they just assumed that outboard synths would become the norm and that people would do, music with MIDI rather than using the internal sound chip. But of course, when you went to the store and bought some games, most of them don't support MIDI. They're all making music with the internal chip and whatever. That was an example of kind of a late bloomer, and it wasn't blooming at all, a late held back computer that could have done better.
Kind of an off prediction, I guess.
Yeah. Or maybe a lack of prediction.
So did music come from computers and gaming? Were you playing instruments, piano, or anything like that beforehand?
So I took Yamaha. They call it like Yamaha Keyboarding 1. It's basically piano for dummies or whatever. They teach you on a single tier organ. And it was like Yamaha organs and whatever. And it's, I took it when I was like 4.5. And I'm sure this is, every kid's equivalent of, like my mom forced me to take violin lessons or, whatever. And I didn't like it. And I wanted out. And I think my mom and my dad even thought about it. Like, my mom is a classically trained pianist, and my dad is into music, sings, whatever, but he was like, you should force him to do that or whatever. And, I felt like I was learning, and I kind of felt like I was having fun, but I also had like a little bit of we went to recital when I just wasn't very good and I had to practice a lot. And, this is of course you're supposed to practice music and practice with your instrument and whatever, but I didn't necessarily have the aptitude that a lot of the other kids had, and I felt out of place, and I didn't really want that. So I fell out of that for a little while, but I remained my household was super musical, and I remained very musically inclined. I was always listening to radio, listening to music. Even video games start coming out, and I start tapping out the music for Tetris on the piano because I at least learned a little bit about the piano from Keyboarding 101. So I would play that, and I would start learning things. And since I had access to our piece of crap PC with a single beeper that could play one tone at a time or whatever. And there's a basic command, play, where you can be like, play a C and then a D sharp and then an F and then a C and for these durations and, like that sort of thing. And that's actually that some chip tuners might refer to as hard mode, but the real term for it is called MML, music markup language. And what I didn't realize was this play command, at least at the time, I didn't realize it. Now I've known it for years. On computers with 3 sound voices, like say, there are like a whole bunch of Japanese computers and they come with BASIC. All of them come with the same programming language. You could actually define a string variable as like what you wanted to play. And you could create 3 strings. And you could be like, play string 1 on channel 1, play string 2 on channel 2, play string 3 on channel 3, and get chords and, like all of these like cool, you could change if the sound chip supported, like changing sounds or instruments or, whatever, you do stuff like that. I didn't, on a PC with a beeper, you didn't have any of those options, but, like Japanese kids had access to this and, little did I know, right? So I started dicking around with this, and this was, me at like, I don't know, 5 years old in, like the mid 80s, learning to write what you would probably call chiptunes, I didn't have access. I did have access to some tools per se, but I didn't really have music software. I was just programming because, like I'd already learned to read at age 2. So I was programming by age 5 and like borrowing books from the library, learning to program in BASIC. Here, type in this program, like now screw with this program, now edit this program and whatever. And, like slowly started writing really piss poor games and, like stuff like that. But also they had music and like, my friends would get video games that I couldn't have. And the thing that I could take home with me was I would take a boombox over to their house and record whatever music, like either it was NES music or it was, their computer or whatever. Hit record on a boombox, take a cassette tape home with me of the audio, and then try to recreate the audio using like this basic play command and other stuff and whatever. And I mean, there were obviously better tools, but I wasn't a music professional. I was a kindergartner or, like a second grader or whatever.
A creative kid just trying to figure out a way.
Yeah. And so I was just sticking around and I, figured out how to do that. And slowly I became more and more obsessed with finding tools. I would get on BBSs, which if you're a little bit young, that means proto-internet stuff. Like I would be dialing up to other computers and calling them directly and downloading files and, stuff like that over the phone. Whatever I could do to get, like music software that maybe wasn't the music software that everyone was using, but it was something that would run on my computer and do something that I would want it to do and write music. And this kind of all came to a T when I built my first PC at a computer show. I was in North Jersey at a Holiday Inn at a computer show or whatever. I don't know that it was actually a Holiday Inn, but whatever. I'm building a PC and I tell the guy, I was like, well, I can afford a 286. What motherboards do you have? And he's like, do you want to pick out a case? And it's like, what video card do you want? And I was like, I can only really afford CGA. So I had 4 colors, which is an awful palette. It's like, how much memory do you want? And, like, do you have a floppy drive or a hard drive? I had already purchased a hard drive from my dad's like work friend, or whatever. And so like, I built this, like basically my birthday computer with like money I'd saved up from my birthday and allowance and stuff like that, and went home with it. But while I'm building the computer, which by the way, it's like 11-year-old at a computer show, and the guy's like, come back in an hour and I'll build a computer for you. I was like, can I do it? I've been upgrading my neighbor's computers and I think I know what I'm doing. And he shoots my dad like I'm not a babysitter sort of look. And my dad just kind of shrugs at him. It's like, he can do it. And so I'm sitting there, right? and I'm looking across the aisle at this guy that has a sound card in his PC, and he's playing CNC Music Factory and, like MC Hammer and all the things, that were like popular at the time. And, just all sorts of other stuff. And it's because it's a sound blaster. I can see like the waveforms, the spectrum analysis, and, like all sorts of cool stuff. The software is called Track Blaster if you want to look it up on YouTube or whatever. And there's no C, so it's TRAK. Blaster, and it's just a music player. It plays mod files, which every Amiga kid knows what a mod file is. So I'm sitting there for an hour building a computer, completely subjected to all of the awesome music coming out of this machine. And I left the computer show and called up this like software of the month club guy and ordered like 20 floppies of all of the music files and whatever that he had. And I got a sound card for Christmas so I could play them all. And like, it was just, like that was a real put me on a trajectory to writing computer music forever, sort of a thing. And what I learned actually is that mod files, again, we were just talking about Amigas, they're all sample based and whatever. So that's not really truly chiptunes, right? I got into writing mods for a very long time, and I realized I was better at playing with sound waves rather than samples. Like I was better at messing around with synthesis. And so sometime in like, I don't know, 2004, 2005 or whatever, I had been talking to Jake Kaufman or Vert or, whatever. And he was like, you should get good. Just like told me that, if you're trying to write chiptunes, what you've got now sucks. You need to read, all of the specifications of all of these sound chips and really figure out how all of this works. And then once you understand those limitations, you'll be able to make really good music for it. And he was right. I got better within, a couple years or whatever, and started sending him my tracks and whatever. And then, when Pretty Ape Machine came out, he's mentioned that it was like one of his favorite chiptune cover albums. So I guess I made it, or at least pleased my mentor, of sorts. So that was nice. And that felt good. And, I've just kind of kept on going, learning more about hardware, more about programming as I go. I was very fascinated by the demo scene as a kid, which is, for anyone that doesn't know, this is like computer music videos made by programmers just to show off. They're not really like game demos or anything. It's just, hey, I bet I could do 3D on this old Atari, and they do, stuff like that. And chiptunes and mod files and all of that are very heavily tied to this. So I've met a bunch of people in the demo scene. I've actually helped to run several demo parties, which are like kind of film festivals where people show off their demos, and stuff like that. And that's been a really fun scene, and, like rabbit hole to fall down and whatever. And it's just all so heavily tied together, like everywhere you look, it's like you talk about this retro machine. Oh, did you know you could do this on that? Oh, wow. And by the way, the guy that did that did this other thing that you're a big fan of already, and you had no idea how that was done. And by the way, he knows this other guy that he worked on with it, and that other guy did this other thing. It's like, it's perfect if you love connecting dots, or, like weird tangents, which is probably what this entire me talking has done. It's just like, and by the way, here's a tangent from that. And so I think, anyway, this scene is, I think there's a reason that people like me, or enthusiasts generally in computers or whatever, really get sucked into the culture. And it's really fun to see, and it's cool to see how much you can learn about all of this. And, like all of it is just, bits flying around, ones and zeros, like there's the cool thing is that computers don't lie to you. And, like they do what you tell them to usually, like So if you're writing software, writing music for it or whatever, and you do it wrong, then you get the wrong result. Sometimes the wrong result is kind of cool. And, you write music based around it or something like that. But anyway, I have yammered for quite some time. Would you like to say something or ask me something?
Yeah, it's really cool how, like all these systems kind of went through their life cycles, and then the new technology came out and they kind of get left behind. But there's people that are just still playing with it and still seeing what they're capable of and making new kinds of art and using them to make music, or just like you said, even just video demos. So you can kind of get a sense of like, hey, look what we could do in theory on these things that haven't been explored. So like there's so much advancement in technology that sometimes things don't get like the full exploration to really get deep. So I could really see how there's communities of people like that are into that, finding out like how much further it can go.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you're a part of the Long Island retro community and whatever. So you get to see this, firsthand or whatever, but, maybe just another view to reaffirm, what you already knew. Well, it's fascinating.
It's not unlike a lot of like old musical gear where people are still exploring like the sounds of, like a DX7 or something like that. There's been so much resurgence in synthesized music, analog synthesis over the years, because there's so much to explore still. There's so much going on.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah. I think the music or the non-computer music equivalent is just like, if someone's messing around with some keyboard and they discover like hidden patches or like a hidden debug mode on a keyboard, and it like produces all these other sounds or whatever. Like that's the kind of stuff that I think a lot of like chiptune and demo scene people and whatever, we're not really out to discover hidden debug modes or, like patches that never exist, because, well, especially in this most simple chiptunes, there are no patches. It's literally square waves and white noise. But, like we are around to discover, like that thing that we thought we never could do with this, like lowly piece of hardware or whatever. So that can be fun.
So when you are making something like Pretty 8 Machine or any of these, even just like the Shake Bit, Harlem Shake stuff, how are you getting those machines to produce the sounds? I mean, so I have an old NES, and it has this special cartridge, MIDI NES cartridge. I wonder if you've heard of it.
Oh yeah, you got MIDI NES. You got the old one. There's a new one called Chip Maestro that does basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got a cartridge literally with a MIDI cable hanging out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's a familiar language. Like, okay, now I press my keys and I can control things with MIDI controls, but that's not how they did it, as far as I understand.
Correct. So a very often, a common misconception is that people, and I'm going to say something that might make you cringe at least, and I'm sorry. But some people will be like, I really love that MIDI sound. And most any musician realizes that MIDI is just a protocol that you connect your gear with. And it's literally just key-ons and key-offs and control codes and sysx. And like there is no sound. It's just a protocol. And none of these consoles, at least in the chiptune or synthesis era or whatever, speak MIDI. So the entire purpose of your MIDI NES cartridge is to literally accept MIDI control codes and velocity and aftertouch and stuff like that, and do something useful with it. In this case, the NES has a bunch of Let's even take this a step further back. Any computer, period, has memory. And if you put values in memory, it could be video memory, which would make something appear on the screen. It could be regular memory, where the computer could do math with it. And some of the chips in the computer have their own memory or registers that it's like a tiny, minute amount of memory, but it's enough. And some of that memory is intentionally overlapping with the computer's memory. So like you have a memory address, we can just say at memory address 300, I'm totally just making this up to make it easy, that the sound chip has 20 bytes of memory at 300. So if I put anything in memory at 300, 301, 302, 303, all the way up to 20, it goes to the sound chip. It might also be stored in the computer's main memory, but it's also stored in the sound chip memory. And what the sound chip does with that is says, okay, I'm going to pick this piece out of this part of memory, and this piece out of this part of memory, and this piece out of that part of memory. And those values that I'm picking out are the volume, the channel, the instrument number, if it even has such a thing, the frequency of the tone that I'm supposed to make, and I will generate a tone automatically and forever based on this value until this value changes. Mm-hmm. And that is every system. That's the NES, that's the Sega, that's, like an Atari, whatever. They all work this way. So with your NES, that memory address is 4,000 hex. And that's where some of the audio stuff starts, right? And the MIDI cartridge has probably like an Arduino or something like it in there that accepts, and MIDI, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know, is serial data. So it's like a serial port. So it accepts the serial data from the MIDI cable, and the data that's sent over serial is like, well, they jammed on a C#, which is note number whatever. And, like it's actually very similar to the way the console works, right? But like note number whatever still doesn't correspond to whatever, like your NES has 11-bit audio precision, so it can produce 2,000 notes. And you're thinking 2,000 notes, I only need 88, right? I'm looking at a keyboard here, but what about all of the notes when you pitch bend between two notes? Those are still frequencies that it needs to be able to produce. So it uses the clock crystal in the NES and divides that clock by whatever number you supply to the sound chip. So like note 1,000 might be directly right in the middle of the scale. So how do we end up with 1,000 from, like the keyboard that just said note number 35, right? So there has to be some sort of translation that happens there. And that's the job of the MIDI NES cartridge. That, and there has to be a program on the cartridge that inserts that value into memory somewhere. And so MIDI NES is actually a very simple device when you think about it. Like if it does anything on the screen, if it lets you change instruments, if it, like listens to control codes from like twisting knobs or, messing with your mod wheel or something like that, that's additional stuff that it has to translate and whatever. But that program doesn't need to be huge. It's not a miracle. It feels magic, right? Putting a cartridge in your NES and like plugging it into the back of a, like Roland MIDI controller, just jamming or something like that. But there is very little magic actually going on. It's just, it's very clever programming. It's not to say that it doesn't take work. It's just that, but I think it's not as cool as people think it is. And some people are like, oh, it's not cool at all. The NES was already MIDI. No, it wasn't. There was definitely still work that needed to be done there. So there are cartridges that do this if you have a MIDI device for any of these systems. Like there's the synth cart and whatever for the Commodore 64 that does it. And there's like a whole bunch of like different MIDI cartridges for the 64. We just mentioned two of them for the NES. There's like Gen MDM. Yeah. If you want to do, that's for the Genesis. There's a whole bunch. So this is where I reveal my personal secrets, which is that I don't use any of these devices.
I had a feeling.
And so to directly answer your question, how do I get stuff to come out of these systems? I'm usually working inside of an emulator, running music software for that system, or I'm working inside of music software designed to write music for that system. and I will save out a disk image or a tape, playback thing, or a ROM, that I actually burn onto a cartridge or put on a flash cartridge. And then I can throw that in the system and play it back on real hardware. But I write on a PC because I just can't give up my keyboard and mouse. Writing music with Game Boy musicians, kudos that you can sit there and hold buttons and move the D-pad up and down and get values that you want to get and write music that way. I'm just like, I'm over that. I want to be able to, I still use my QWERTY keyboard on my PC as, a piano keyboard. QWERTY is C, D, E, F, G, and your black keys are, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, they're directly, diagonally offset, just like a real piano. So you have like a real piano setup in most of these trackers or whatever that you can do note entry with.
And you're using trackers to do that?
Yeah. In my opinion, it is the only authentic way to do it, other than maybe the MML hard mode thing that I was talking about earlier. If you do it in anything else, it's not real.
Yeah. So, where you're basically each line, it's almost like a line of code, right? Where you're just telling it, turn on this note, whatever frequency, pitch, duration, timbre, I guess. And
if that even exists.
Line by line, right?
It looks like I usually I have a habit of calling it a spreadsheet with a play button.
It looks like that.
It definitely looks like that. You see like C#4 or whatever, which is a C# in the fourth octave, and then the next thing is usually the instrument number, and then the next thing is usually the volume level, and then the next thing is often empty, but sometimes a special effect value, like if you want to do vibrato or you want to do a pitch bend or something like that. Then you can do that in the special effect column, and then you just move to the next channel. And most of these sound chips can only do 3 or 4 notes at a time. They don't really have, they're not kings of polyphony. So you can fit all this information for 2 beats, 3 beats, 4 beats of music on your screen for all 4 channels. And this is where I think the elegance of trackers really comes into play. Often if you're working in, I don't know, whatever you work in, Ableton, Reaper, whatever, you've got this kind of like zoomed out view where you can see the different parts of your music, and you can see, literally, your A and B sections if you want to, use a really, I don't know, antiquated way of referring, like they talk about, like A, B, A, B, A, C, whatever, in music classes. But the point is that you have to like really zoom in to see all of the stuff, and you don't have really a quick at the glance, you're usually looking at piano rolls. You might be looking at, like actual staffs if you're doing, I don't know, working like finale or something. But you don't just see the raw data right next to each other. You don't see, okay, C4, E4, G4 right next to each other on the same line, and you can literally move your cursor up and down and whatever to see which notes are playing at the same time. And, and you can just bump stuff with the insert and delete keys and move stuff around very easily. And, I'm sure someone, if there's ever a comment section, someone will blow right in here and be like, actually, in such and such editor, you can do this, but I can guarantee you it's not as easy as it is in a tracker to, get things to line up. There might be some, note pull down where you can be like, snap these notes, quantize these, whatever, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying I write an entire section and I just want to go plop and, or push it forward or pull it backwards in time. And you can just do this so easily in a tracker. So that's why I love that environment. But also this tracker environment directly translates to what needs to be set to the chip much better, right? Like your MIDI program or, your DAW or your composing app or whatever is taking all of these values, turning them into MIDI, shitting them over a cable, and to like whatever synthesizer and whatever. And, like all of this translation is going on every step of the way. And in a tracker, literally what you see is maybe one step from being put in memory in the sound chip. Like there's really not a whole lot, of translation to be done. So in a way, it's very elegant, you could say, or maybe even elegant, because a lot of people be like, I looked at that interface and no way. But maybe succinct would be, a better word to describe it. It's short, it's sweet, it's to the point. You know exactly what's going to come out by what you wrote. And so that's why I really like writing music this way. Also, I don't know how to read a staff. I don't know how to read tabs. I told you I already don't know how to play piano. I didn't learn to play any other instruments. I did try. I tried to learn guitar. I tried to learn bass. I tried to learn woodwinds. I tried to learn some string instruments. I just couldn't. I tried to learn to play drums, and just none of it clicked more than this.
Yeah, it's much more programming and computer-looking stuff. Like you said, it almost looks like a spreadsheet. So I know Brendan Bailey, who is the Long Island Retro.
Brendan. The other Brendan. Actually, there are multiple Brendans writing chiptunes, not just us. But
so he's kind of runs a lot of the museum stuff within the expo here, and he's working on his own game. And he's composing the music, and so I was at his place, and his house itself is like a museum, but he's got his music area, and he was showing me the music on the games done with the tracker, and I was really blown away with how he's got, like, maybe say it's like the A section, we'll call it. It's only a couple lines, and then it moves just the one spot where the fill comes in is like just one more little thing. And then it just goes back and around. And I was really impressed with how it's able to consolidate so much musical information into such a small area. But it's also so expressive, which I was watching him do it. And I was just kind of like my jaw was on the floor. I'm hearing it. It sounds great. It's got a lot of energy. And it's not as stiff as I always imagined it would have to be if you're going to program that way. There's so much expression. And I hear that too, in your work, that it's just, it kind of boggles my mind that you can do that in that kind of way of writing, where even just stuff like the vibrato or the little changes that happen in a sound or the pitch bends can all happen in those little areas. Whereas if you were doing it on the timeline in a DAW, you need that time to draw out the specific movements, or even just assign certain LFOs or whatever it might be to create those changes in the sound. But it is like you said, I don't really understand it too well, and it looks like a different language, but I could see how tidy it is and how compact you can make the ideas, but then just have like little alterations happen here and there. And
part of that is built out of necessity. You have to realize that, like the Nintendo has K of memory, right? The entire game has to fit in memory. Yeah. So, like we don't really have a lot of room to do what we're doing already. So that music better fit, and that's why the tracker doesn't want to have too much extraneous data as well, is because this is all something that, like we have to be able to hit load and play on. And that has to fit while we're, often, sometimes it's just music for the sake of music, right? But sometimes there's an entire game that has to be going on at the same time as this music. We need RAM and that sort of thing. So songs have to be, like infinitesimally small. So that's there's that. As far as the feeling goes, you've got a Brendan right down the street that could help you, but I'm happy to be a second Brendan to sit around with you and explain tracker things. I have offered tracker workshops at conventions, and like anywhere that I've been booked, to perform or give a presentation or whatever, or even just like a place I'm selling my music or whatever, but I've actually like got a table or, whatever, and I'm hawking my stuff, I'll just sit down and teach people to use trackers because it's fun. Cool. And it's something that I feel like I can probably do in about an hour, and get people to do it. Actually, I've got I think there's like 1 or 2 archived videos on my Twitch channel of me building sound effects for a game, which I also did in a tracker. Oh, cool. But I mean, it's the same tool, whether or not I wanted, sound effects or music. So you can watch me build sound effects. But if you find me anywhere, or, if I can finally get off my lazy ass and start streaming on Twitch again, then I'm happy to do more live streams where people, learn to write music in a tracker. It's not hard. It isn't the most amazing thing to write music in, especially if you're used to, there are limits to it. Like you can't write real sounding music in a tracker as easily as you can just record yourself playing a guitar and importing it into a DAW. I would say that's the same on any DAW. A real guitar just always sounds more real than the instrument, the virtual instrument, or whatever it is. But I think I can get you from zero to music in an hour. And I think I can get you from beginner to intermediate in another hour. So this isn't a bluff, but if you think it is, call me out on it anytime you find me in person, and we'll sit down and write music in a track.
Yeah, that's a bold statement. I like it, though. Now, how do you record everything out of the systems? Do you just kind of take whatever line out they have for audio and just put it into...
Some people will modify consoles, like Game Boy kids especially. They have what they call a Pro Sound mod because you want to bypass the Game Boy op amp to get clean audio. But a lot of the systems just have a line out, or you can tap a specific pin and get line out or something like that. So that's pretty straightforward. I'm actually working on building a synthesizer from scratch, which if you saw my Patreon or my header image on any of my social media or whatever, there's a picture of a bunch of wires sticking out every which way and like some LEDs and whatever. I have this 4-inch square board that I can install sound chips on, and it literally just has 2 RCA jacks over on the side, and you can run the audio output straight out of the sound chip to the RCA jack, and whatever level it puts out is what level you get out of there. So I run all of those in the synthesizer into this little tiny 8-channel mini mixer and whatever. And hopefully, whenever I can finish it, the hardware is like 85% there. And now I have to build my own tracker from scratch because we built the hardware from scratch. So I'm building a tracker from scratch that can control all these synthesizer boards. And that way I can actually do something like play Pretty 8 Machine on the road without having to carry a Commodore and an NES and an Atari and a Sega Master System. And well, right now I don't do, I mean, I go on the road and I play, if I play a live show with Chiptunes or whatever, I'm usually just bringing my laptop with me, and, like playing it out of the tracker, which probably has, like a lot of the trackers on PC or whatever are just, like a tracker interface with like an emulator for whatever system you're using kind of crammed up its rear end. And then, like when you hit notes inside of the tracker, it just plays them out of the emulator or whatever. So that's a really common way to, like play live shows without having the hardware with you. Yeah. There were a couple shows, like 2013-ish or something like that. I started playing, I played an 8-Static festival where I actually had a Hack to Hell Genesis with a hardware interface that was tied to a hacked version of Defel Mask, So I had, yeah, Devil Mask is just a multi-system music tracker. You can write NES or Genesis or whatever music in it. And so in Genesis mode, I had this thing actually sending register values out to the Genesis, and I could get real audio out of the Genesis, so that I was like emulation free in a way. But it ended up being stupid. I ended up like, the sound output from Devil Mask wasn't the best, but it didn't need to be perfect. Like I was exploiting nothing by doing this. Like my music didn't take advantage of any, like extreme hardware hacks or anything that you couldn't do in emulation, but you could do on the real hardware. So I ended up kind of ditching the Genesis after a while. But I do hope to go specifically to the sound chips, only in the future, and explore this sort of hardware option. So I'm writing, the entire software package is written from scratch by me. And there are no audio drivers per se. It just sends memory information to these sound chips over USB. And then, you'll get audio out of the chips, and it already works. If you pop over to like my YouTube channel or whatever, you can like Google for like CTM, which is the name of the tracker, which probably stands for chicken tikka masala, but don't quote me on that. But search for like CTM inverse phase, and you'll find some like demo videos of the tracker working. And reminder, this is like 35% done. It's very alpha and poor sounding, but you can hear real music coming out of like this weird chain of things that I wrote in like Python and like soldered together by hand.
That's so awesome.
Which is it's satisfying to see that work.
I love that. There's a few gadgets around now where people have emulated, recreated, or used the sound chips, made synthesizer. I have Mega FM by Twisted Electrons. Are you familiar with them?
I've heard of Mega FM. The one that I would probably be using, if I used a DAW, I'd probably be using all the Plug.
Plug is great,
packages.
Chip sounds they have
chip sounds, chip synth, and like all of that and whatever. David Vian, the guy that develops all of the plugins and the back end software for all of that, sits around and reverse engineers the hell out of these sound chips. And whenever, he is by far the most thorough person I have ever seen doing something like this. And
you can check out all that documentation. It's
wild. The documentation is there, and this guy, he submits drivers to MAME, to like existing emulators to improve the authenticity of those things or whatever. He's very serious about what he does, and these are some of the coolest things that you have ever used. So if you want to fake it, so to speak, but you want it to be as authentic as possible, absolutely use the Plug stuff.
I agree. I've got a bunch of their things. I love them all.
Yeah,
they're incredible. So when you're doing this, you're recreating a track or an album like this, you have to do a couple things, I guess. You have to figure out what the notes are, right? You're dissecting it musically.
I transcribe by ear. Yeah.
Okay, so that's all by ear. Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, everything is by ear. I don't use any sort of like MIDI or previously notated source, and the reason is I can't read that, so I don't care. Like I could. Every good boy does. Okay, that's an F. I can do that, I suppose, but like, God, would that take forever? And then none of these trackers. Well, I shouldn't say none of them, because there's like thousands and thousands of them. So I'm sure some of them do, but none of the trackers that I use do MIDI import. So like, it's completely useless. Like they'll do MIDI as in, like I can play a MIDI keyboard, and I suppose I could just wire it so that, like a MIDI player outputs to a tracker that takes MIDI in. Sure. But like, the biggest problem is that none of this translation sounds right. to me, like, and probably to a whole lot of other people. And there are like programs out there that will just take a MIDI file and play it and make it sound like chiptunes. And there are 13,000, probably 13 million kids out there that are like 9 or 13 or like something like that have transcribed every MIDI file on the internet into a 8-bit remix. And since you can't see the air quotes, on a podcast, just make sure that you know that they are there. Go ahead and do me a favor and search for, whatever song it is that you want. Like, let's go ahead and just do it. Search for Head Like a Hole 8-bit on YouTube and find a version that isn't mine. And what you're going to find is that there are like 10 versions that are all not mine. And when I started doing this, there weren't. And they all sound like the exact same, like MIDI guitar remix with some slight variances and whatever. And then go listen to mine and tell me if you think it sounds different. And and then do me a favor and never listen to those others again, because they're all fake. Like they're using some sort of like, MIDI automatic chiptune thing that just plays a MIDI file with, like crap instruments or whatever. There are even people like selling this, on like Apple Music and Spotify and whatever. And just, like they just run a shitty MIDI through that was transcribed by someone else. They probably didn't even transcribe the music on their own. I think there are all sorts of rights issues that are maybe perhaps left unaddressed. And it's not a fun time. And I don't know how to properly. I don't want to lambaste these people for doing cool, or maybe I don't think they're cool, but for doing cover versions that, like pay homage to retro systems. Like, I feel like maybe their heart is in the right place, but like, I think that people that listen to them, they're like, oh, cool, a Nintendo version of my favorite song. And that's like really misleading because 1, it's not even done on a Nintendo. 2, it's not even done within the limitations of the Nintendo. And 3, like the person didn't know anything about it when they were doing it. They were just like, I'm just going to use this program, hit record and upload it to YouTube.
Misrepresentation of,
and that really cheapens, actually, you probably heard of Danimal Cannon. He's a very famous, chip tuner, that also played in Arm Cannon, the video game cover band. And he plays in, Weapon X, which is their prog, not video game cover department, but all the same people. But anyway, the point is he wrote a big long article about how people were often just turning like 8-bit stuff into kind of a cash in based on nostalgia and retro and whatever. And I mean, like the rose tinted glasses and all of that. Like not everyone remembers that, when you play Zelda, you're not actually playing the character called Zelda. You're playing the character called Link, and you have to rescue Zelda, but there are still, character like shirts that say, don't make me go Zelda on you with a picture of Link and a sword. I mean, like, maybe we could, this ties back maybe more into my museum curator experience. Maybe we could remember history a little bit better. I don't want people in 10 years to listen to all of these like random MIDI remixes and be like, yep, that's what it was like back in the day. I was playing Nintendo and it sounded like that. It didn't sound like that. We can do better. And we're in this now, so it's the proper time to record the proper, history or whatever of these systems and whatever. Anyway, rant over.
I think it's amazing though. For one, just to transcribe it, but now you also have to create the sounds.
Yeah.
So,
So yeah, I went on a long tangent.
I mean,
So
you said this was just a year it took you to do this?
well, a year and a half to do Pretty Eight Machine. If
Unbelievable.
thinking about music that is in my head, sometimes original music takes longer. Sometimes original music takes a shorter amount of time. If I am really on and focused, I can get maybe a minute of music out in an hour or two, something like that, of, like completed, reasonable sounding, final draft quality, I guess. And
it's a very tracker way of thinking about it, I think, as well. Like, because you're doing it in like the blocks method.
Yeah. There's a little bit of that in there. And also it's just that I've had to think about this a lot because I take commissions. So I have to like realize, like how much time am I spending on this thing for the client, and am I charging the client, an appropriate amount of money for my time, and, that sort of a thing. And the answer is, honestly, almost 100% of the time, no. They're getting a great deal, because that's only if I'm focused. If I'm not focused, then I spend like 2 days trying to come up with like 30 seconds of audio instead of, and sometimes you can be, like, unless they give you something that really strikes your fancy or, like perks up your ears or whatever, you can be very uninspired, just not write anything. And then there's my own personal shortcomings, which is that, like, I don't actually have perfect pitch. I don't know what notes are. I don't have live performance abilities. I don't know how to read a musical staff. So I hear the music in my head, but to write original music, I don't connect my brain to my hands with an instrument that I play. So I have to basically produce a chiptune cover of what's playing in my head to write music for a client, and have it be original music. And that's my own damn fault, my own damn problem. So in the end, actually, when I charge on commissions, I charge them for delivered music, not for, the amount of time I spent on the track. So it doesn't matter if it took me an hour or 3 days, they pay for 1 minute of music because that's what they wanted.
Right.
But yeah, so, working in the tracker and, pick a track, Terrible Lie, which I did as Atari Lie. I load up an Atari emulator. I load up, for that one, it was Music Pro Tracker. I build instruments inside of Music Pro Tracker, and I track out, Terrible Lie, listening to, maybe 5 or 10 seconds of the song at any given time. And I listen to like a little short loop, and then I go over to the tracker and try to write those notes out. And I go back and forth until I have like a skeleton. Sometimes I'll really just be feeling the bass line of a song. So I'll just like write the entire bass line out of the song. And sometimes I'll be feeling more than that, or, I want to work on the drums or whatever. Sometimes a lot of the time, especially like with Pretty Eight Machine, I kind of chose systems that sounded like the song that I was writing. So I'd listen to the whole song and I'd be like, he makes that one noise that kind of sounds like a Nintendo or, like whatever. And then try and do it that way. Terrible Lie has that really gritty guitar tone. And so I chose the Atari because it also has that like really gritty bass instrument. I thought that would do well. But anyway, so I go through that process, and that's the majority of the process. I try to write at tempo when the tracker supports it. It's possible that you might not get the tempo that you ask for. If you work in a really...
What do you mean by that?
So,
you can't set the tempo?
The beats per minute is based on what exactly? In your computer, you have a real-time clock that you can base your beats per minute on, and it can be like, okay, what time is it? thousands of times a second and give you very precise timing of where you are in the song. Commodore 64 doesn't have that. So how does it base its tempo? And the answer is also, how do you control the sound chip? Because when you're building a picture on the screen, like in a game or whatever, the CPU is busy. Like it's basically taking bits of video memory and putting them on the screen, and it can do nothing else, or you literally get like snow on your screen, which actually in some old DOS games, you do get snow on your screen because it's updating the screen too fast. So the time to update the sound chip is when thinking of a CRT monitor for a second, which I know there are people listening who probably have never even seen one, but there's an electron gun that draws a picture by scanning across the screen. And then at the bottom of the screen, the electron gun literally has to, and I mean, this is like milliseconds or microseconds or whatever of time, return to the top of the screen to get ready to draw the next picture. And the frame remains on the screen for approximately 16 or so milliseconds or something like that, which works out to 60 frames per second. And that's how like a TV or a VCR or an NES or whatever scans a picture onto the screen. So within that very, very tiny amount of time that the gun is going back to the top of the screen, that's when you update the sound chip.
Wow.
And that's also when you figure out if player 2 died, and that's also where you move the enemies around on the screen. That's also where you run the game logic, and you also do all of this other things. So that's why 8 bytes of RAM is totally enough for your sound chip. Like that's the, like updating that sound chip more than once per vertical refresh of the screen is probably out of the question, because you're doing all of this other stuff. So if you update the screen only 60 times a second and update the sound chip only 60 times a second, it basically works out to, you can do 180, 150, 129, 113, like certain beats per minute values. And that's it.
Wow.
And you can't do anything else. And if you want to do some odd, like if you want to do 140 beats per minute on the console, you literally have to update the sound chip in the middle of drawing a picture on the screen, which could cause the screen to glitch out, or it might be like, I don't know if you are old enough, but certainly you've seen old Atari 2600 games. You ever notice how Atari 2600 games, even though the screen is 4:3, they seem to be widescreen, like they're only running in part of the screen? It's because the Atari isn't fast enough to calculate things, so they literally leave a third of the screen blank so that they can use it as extra CPU time. Like that's why that's part of the screen is blank.
Yeah.
So,
totally.
So you could do this. Another good example is if you ever watch, like if you go down the rabbit hole for some of this demo scene stuff and you watch some Commodore 64 demos and you hear a demo playing like sample playback on a sound chip that's not supposed to be able to do that, and you see all this garbage in the border of the screen or just on the screen or whatever, the garbage is so that the programmer can get the timing of the sound chip to line up perfectly so that you can have a periodic, like sample update sent out to the sound chip. So you get all this garbage up and down the left side of the screen or in the middle of the screen, just so that they can have precise timing to update the sound chip at the right times.
It's incredible that anything got made.
Right?
Like all these limitations and challenges, and I mean, like the scanning thing is insane, but the idea that it has to happen in between, and you can see that artifact if you ever saw like a videotape of the old CRT TVs. They always have like kind of lines moving around. I guess that's some kind of weird, almost like a phasing issue with the visual and the frame rate of the tape.
That might be tracking, where the tape is literally not aligned with the signal that's supposed to come out of the tape, and so it just gets snow. because snow
Even
is just kind
talking
of
the way the screen, when you videotape a screen video, like camcorder, how it always
You're
had
talking
like
about,
the
okay, so like when the
blank
motion is
spots.
really fast, you see like
Yeah.
interleaf lines. Okay, so
Right.
that's interlacing.
Uh-huh.
So the TV is 240p, and we needed more resolution. So what people started doing is, instead of operating at 240p 60 frames a second, they would operate at 480i, which is technically 240p 30 frames a second, but the first frame is these, and I know no one can see my hand, but I'm basically spreading my fingers out. And then I have my second hand here with 4 other lines, and it's putting together a full 480 picture. So you're scanning like line 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, all your odd lines, the first frame. And then on the second frame, you can send the TV a signal that kind of kicks the gun a little bit, and then draw an interleaved picture with all of your even lines, the other frame. And so if your eyes are good, you can just see this happening. But most of the time, especially in a CRT TV, the reason you'll see it especially on LCDs is because the LCDs have individual lines of resolution that are displaying this. But in a CRT TV, if it was designed to like display a 240p picture, it's literally just the gun hitting the top of the pixel and the bottom of the pixel, and basically doubling the resolution of the TV by just hitting a different part of the screen with the gun. So that's what you're explaining.
That is funny.
Yeah, it's so cool. A total hardware hack.
Yeah. And again, it's another way around this stuff, right? Where creative, I always think a lot of creativity happens out of these sorts of limitations. When you sort of have every option and every possibility, you can just sort of keep cycling through your options until you like one. But when you're forced to work with this particular limitation, like if you take the NES, there's only so many channels. You only have 5 channels, and then you listen to the music, and it's amazing how the drums even will play so that they're what would that be called, like linear drumming, I guess, where you never play the same two sounds at the same time, and things drop out on the particular beat the drum hits, so that there's still room in all of those tracks for other sounds to have. It's just incredible that it's so, and they made such music that is so memorable and catchy and interesting, that with so little, like you said, like you only have so much time, so it's got to be such a small file, and it's going to be on loop for however long it takes you to play the level, and still it's
that's
still
probably how it gets stuck in your head. Been listening to the song for like 30 minutes trying to beat the stage or whatever.
But you would think that video game music would be more irritating because of that, but it's
maybe
it's not. It's
I think there's an interesting thing that happened there. Maybe this didn't happen with everyone, but I think that to find nerds that are willing to write computer music, let's zap ourselves back to like the 70s and 80s and whatever, to find people that are musically inclined that are going to write computer music and actually do a good job at it, not like, have you ever heard the term programmer art? This is, like when programmers put like placeholder art and stick figures and whatever, the guy is supposed to move here, and it's just, like, and then it's like, I really got to hire an artist that actually can draw, and then you get real art in the game and it looks good, right? But so there's a, programmer music is certainly another, version of this, right? But the music in video games, in my opinion, really got good when we actually got musicians with computer experience rather than computer programmers with music experience, or at least people that had a very strong experience with both. And if you ask me, and again, this is like a super generalization, I'm sorry to all involved. Like I think that these are going to be people that are interested in weird kinds of music to begin with. So like computer programmers that are also musicians are probably into some avant-garde shit. Like they're probably into prog. They're probably into, like very specific orchestral passages. They're probably into, and like all of these things are not generic pop music. It's not boring stuff. And so they're already going to try and inject, like, man, they're going to think writing computer music, man, this is boring. Let's make this better and whatever. And at least, kind of, they're going to feel the same way that you just felt out loud, right? Like, why isn't this more boring? Why am I not sick of this or whatever? They want to write music like that. And I mean, I feel the same way, right? When I write my stuff is, how can I write something that isn't boring? Like, can I listen to this for like 30 minutes straight? Is that okay? And sometimes I've actually like left my music on loop for, 30 minutes, just make sure that, I'm not already tired of it after spending 30 hours writing it, but, how can I, what annoys me about this? I'll send it to people and I'll be like, play this for 5 minutes. Does anything stick out to you? Stuff like that. But I think that, there's you were mentioning, like the limits and the creativity. Is it I might be misquoting. Is it like a Jules Verne quote or whatever, that limitation breeds creativity or something like that? It's probably been used by like a billion people at this point.
Comes up a lot. Yeah, I don't know if there's an attributable that I'm aware of.
But I think that if you've basically created a perfect storm for this with, like the limitations of the sound chip, the fact that you threw a nerd with music experience in front of it and said, hey, make music, whatever. Is it easy? No. But, like, is it fun? Maybe. Yeah. A lot of people like it. And, some people have called it like computer masochism or something like that. I don't know. It's just, it's something that I think that nostalgic people will spend a lot of time trying to figure out so that they can do something similar to like what they experienced as a kid.
Is that what it is for you? Yeah. That's the thrill of it. Yeah. Because
one of many thrills.
You don't have to spend too much time, even with the MIDI NES, with MIDI on your Nintendo. It doesn't take too long for you to be like, oh my God, this is hard, or this is challenging, that I can't do a lot here. And it's very easy to be like, let me go back to where I have every option again. It's like, we're like superpowers now. And back with like, when you go to something like that, it's like using, sticks and, caveman tools.
Yeah. Beat the NES with a club, then maybe the game will start.
But yeah, for me, it is the nostalgia, the sound of it. It's not so much the workflow, but it is just the sound, that's been beaten into my brain over some of the formidable years, just playing these games over and over. I wonder, are you finding like in your museum, like young people getting into that? Is it, because they wouldn't necessarily have the nostalgia, but I wonder if it still strikes something in them.
I mean, I think that there is, some kids are just like, it's, not whatever the popular musician is of the week. And they're just not interested in whatever. But I think if you frame it right, like we've got an exhibit here that I built called Sound Chip Showdown. And it basically plays the same, you can listen to the same song from a game or whatever on different hardware configurations, because like, Bubble Bobble is in there, right? And Bubble Bobble came out on like 20 different systems or whatever. So you can listen to the arcade version and the PC version and the NES version and whatever, and seamlessly switch between them and whatever. And it's really fun to play around with. But the way I usually introduce the exhibit is actually not by talking about sound at all, but by talking about, I was like, okay, today I gave a tour and I was like, hey, let's talk about Call of Duty. If you get Call of Duty for the PlayStation, for the Xbox, for, like the Switch or the Wii or whatever, it's the same game. I mean, it might play worse or better on one of the other consoles. Your controls might be slightly different, but it's the same game with the same assets and the same story. They basically just ported it to all three of those systems. But if you look to, like 1986, getting a game for a different computer might be, even though it says it's the same game, like, buying like Afterburner for the Commodore 64 and buying Afterburner for like the NES. And both of these systems are even like 6502 based systems. The Commodore is a 6510, which is a derivative of the 6502. And then the NES is a 2A03, which is a derivative of the 6502. Like, you can write the same code for these CPUs and literally have the same game. And this is how they like ported games and had games out for a lot of systems fairly quickly. And you'd think this would be really inspiring. Like, okay, now that we've got all of these CPUs that are the same, let's just release the exact same thing for all of these systems, but the video chips are different, the sound chips are different, the knowledge for where that information should go in memory is different, and whatever. So they would often just throw different teams on them, and you'd end up with completely different games that sound and look completely different. And this takes me to the point is, you look at the back of the box for the game, and they're like, if you have the PC version, it looks like this. If you have the Commodore version, it looks like this. If you have Amiga, it looks like this. And you're like, if you have a Mac, it's in black and white and it looks like this. And you realize that all of this hardware is so wildly different and that there's so much to explore. So I think that when I'm showing, old game sound or something like that to, like a 15-year-old coming through the museum, they realize, okay, maybe this isn't as cool. Like, maybe I can't get, like, I don't know, whatever musician, to come out of all of these systems and have it sound exactly the same. But there are a lot of people that find the sort of like exploration and going down the rabbit hole and seeing what these systems sound like and what they're all about and how they were designed and whatever. I think there are a lot of kids that come through that are interested in that and interested in the stories and interested in why that is, that it's different. Like, they don't even care that it is. They just want to know why, and so I think that that's a kind of inspiring thing that, people will ask. And I mean, that was one of the things that fascinated me and why I started learning, how to write music for dozens of different systems. As I was like, okay, what's this sound chip all about? What did this engineer think when, they were designing it or whatever? And I actually got to ask that question to some of those engineers. I met, the sound chip that I dissed on earlier is actually a very capable, sound chip, the 8910. And I actually, 3 years ago, I got to meet the guy that engineered it. And he gave me some of his old hardware and whatever. And I got to ask him questions, and I played him examples of music that was being produced on it today. And he was like, "Oh, I never meant for any of this to happen." It was a very interesting sort of experience sharing, 8910 music with the creator of the 8910. Stuff like that. So.
Oh yeah, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the music now on a game it's recorded, right? So it's just on the disc or whatever, or the download.
It's playing a WAV file or whatever.
Yeah, it's not generating it on the chip. It's not coming out of going through the whole system and all of that. So it's interesting.
Yeah,
I could see how that
sound
would be
hardware
really,
these days is just a DAC.
Yeah, a really foreign concept to somebody knew like growing up today.
Mhm.
That's so cool you're doing that, man. I love that you're preserving this, you're passing it on, and that you're capturing it too, and you're demonstrating it with your music. What, like, I'm obviously going to put all this stuff in the show notes that we've been talking about, but I think I would imagine like Nine Inch Nails is pretty popular for a lot of listeners here. So to hear this stuff get processed through all these different systems and hear like the fidelity change and the energies change and the timbres change and the amount of sounds change is it's so cool, and it's like a history lesson, within the album. It's great. You really did such a cool job on it, and
Thank you.
I'm glad that you're preserving this stuff, not just for us, for our nostalgia, but also for new people to check out that haven't ever seen it before.
Yeah. Well, I hope they learned something, and if they didn't, I hope they ask me a question so that they can.
Yeah. Well, cool. So
yeah,
I know we can tell them to go to the museum in Maryland if they want to take a trip there. And we've got links. You've got the Bloop Museum is on Twitter, Instagram. There's bloopmuseum.com, right? Takes you to the Patreon so people can support.
Yeah. And we're also, I'm not very loud about this, so I should be loud about it right now. Bloop Museum and Inverse Phase are both on Mastodon now, and I'm having a great time over there. So join us on Mastodon if you if you
were
want.
saying
Inverse
that.
Phase is that's actually kind of how we started chatting, right?
Yeah.
As I was like, man, I'm peacing out from Twitter. Well, I'm not gone yet, but I'm going to pay a little bit less attention to that and more to Mastodon, because the experiences are great, and there are a whole lot of nerds and thoughtful people over there, and that's nice. That's an experience I want. So Inverse Phase is so the way Mastodon handles work is you've got your own handle and then the instance that you're on. So I am at Inverse Phase at hackers.town for Inverse Phase.
Okay.
And then I am at Bloop Museum at oldbytes.space for the museum.
Nice. We'll put that in there as well. And inversephase.bandcamp.com to check out the music.
It's the best place to go.
There's a lot there too. It's really cool. Is there anything else you want to share with people, or did I forget?
Oh gosh. I think if you don't cut me off, I'm not going to shut up. The museum is just north of Baltimore. The only thing that I can think of is you can look the museum up. It is not immediately apparent how to get a tour here. What I want you to do is send me a message and tell me when you want to come. And I will just literally set aside some time and personally give you a tour, because I don't think that you're going to fall in love with the stuff if someone doesn't show you and let you touch it and, that sort of a thing. I am in the building 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week, unless otherwise at an event already or something like that. And I'd love to show people around. So the easiest thing to do is yell at me on the internet. So that's what I'm imploring everyone to do is, send me messages, engage with me, talk to me. It can get lonely working in the warehouse in the back and doing inventory all of the time. So it feels nice when people reach out and say, like, hey, show me this cool thing. I'll like fire back with, like pictures on social media. Like some guy was like, what kind of vacuum tube computers do you have? And stuff like that. Like go over that machine and take a picture and be like, what do you think? And stuff like that. So, I want to interact with people more, and I want to teach them stuff and convey information and have fun. So yeah, awesome, reach out. Man. I guess that's my, reach out. You can do this. This is fun. Please explore the demo scene, explore Chiptunes, ask me for recommendations. If you have something that you're particularly interested in, you just fire me a message and be like, hey, I'd really like to learn about music on such and such. Where do I start? And I'll see what I can do.
I think you'll do a lot. Very cool. Well, thanks for taking the time. And thank you for everyone that's listening. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Take care.